I've met most of you already. My name is Ruck, and I was prematurely given a PhD actually on my name badge here, but I do not have one. I'm a PhD student. My research is connected to this project here called pollination, which I'm going to speak about quite a bit. And my supervisor, Dr. Greg Mannion, also deserves mention here because he was very involved with setting this research project up, and he and I gave a kind of early version of this presentation a while ago. Now, I did have two aims for this presentation. The first was something we gave at a teacher training event a while ago, which was these 4 signposts for practice for a citizen science project. Actually, with that, I think we've covered it all, pretty much. But with this being the last one, and with people watching online as well, I will run through those things quickly, and it can serve as a kind of summary, I think, for us, because we kind of know this stuff already, I think. The other thing I was going to do was talk about some practical kind of practical orientations that really have come out of my observations of this pollination project, and what's worked and what hasn't, really. So I'll try and spend a bit more time on that and a bit less on the signposts. So pollination, basically, so my research was connected to this project. I spent quite a bit of time in schools that were part of this over the academic year of 2016 to 17, I guess. But anyway, a bit more about pollination. It is a conservation and a citizen science project. Now, the citizen science element was this survey here. I'll go back to the other slide in a minute, but that was this survey produced by an organisation called OPAL, which is Open Air Laboratories, who are based in London. And this was standardised, produced for all of these schools that were involved, and the project as a whole was funded by the UK's Heritage Lottery Fund, and involved 260 schools across the UK, all of whom had to apply to be part of this project, and in return they would get funding for resources, for planting things in the school grounds and so on, and also the support from a member of staff from this charity, Learning Through Landscapes, who were the main ones running it. So 260 schools, the survey element that they would do, they would basically take an area of school grounds and count the number of pollinators that came to that area, and they would also count the number of plants that were suitable for pollinators in that area. Pollination, obviously the main point of it was attracting more pollinators to school grounds, and crucially involving young people in the creation of those habitats. Okay, so planting flowers, trees, leaving areas wild and so on. And the citizen science element, and this is the key message I think, was combined with those. So they do the survey, they'd kind of work out, okay, usually this isn't really a very good sign for pollinators, and then they would kind of do the work to make sure that it was. So how it worked in practice was these project officers, they were called, members of staff from Learning Through Landscapes. They would come in, they would run that survey, they would run usually 3 more sessions, I think, that would come in, fairly standardised sessions with each school. And then the idea was that the teachers and the young people were to take the initiative from there, and it was to become fully embedded in the curriculum and everything like that. That was the idea. It happened in some cases, but I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that came from that. So just to give you some idea, that was the survey I talked about. And this was probably a typical example of a school. They set aside a pollination site, and they sort of fenced it off, and they planted some things. They've got, I think it was some strawberries or something growing there, and they planted some fruit trees as well. And they've got some a wild area left at the side. Right at the end there, they have some beehives even. And with the point being attracting pollinators. For sort of balance, that was an example of quite a few schools were like that. Pollinator-free zone. And they took some more modest steps in that case to attract pollinators. Basically putting some planters with a few flowers in them to try and attract at least a few of them. And so, before I go through these signposts quickly, where I sort of saw the biggest potential in citizen science really was for preparing young people for addressing complex environmental problems and environmental stewardship, the sense that we can play an active part in addressing those issues. And a number of other benefits, of course, the engagement with science and so on that we've talked about already. But those were the key things that I saw. And to run through those signposts quickly, they all handily begin with the letter R. Now, my supervisor and I, we worked out that to effectively embed citizen science into education, we need to make it regular, real, relevant, and this is the kind of most complicated one, responsive with and in place. Now, we have kind of covered these already, so I will run through them very quickly. Now, regular, we've talked about this, I think, as often as possible in the same place, or at least part of a project that takes place regularly in the same place. At least, the science element should be part of something larger. And sustaining or building interest rather than simply stimulating interest with one exciting thing. And that really echoes other areas of environmental education research, right? By real, so there is these guidelines that say citizen science has to produce new knowledge and understanding, and so that is basically contributing to real scientific research. But actually there are a number of studies, or at least a couple of studies out there, which say that for young people who've been interviewed about this, that isn't actually the main thing. It is one thing, but there are other things, such as directly experiencing and the thing that you're gathering data on, and involvement in the whole scientific process, so that is like, reporting on the results as well, and ideally helping to design the survey as well. It's not all about the official use of data, it's about helping it to feel like a real experience for young people. So relevant, again, studies have said that using their own community as a source and location for learning is an important thing. That's not to say that we shouldn't engage young people with big issues like climate change and so on. Of course we should, but I'm saying that really to embed them in a local community, a local context, and to sort of work outwards from there to the bigger issues is the best way to get young people involved or interested. This thing about allowing young people to find their own skills and areas of interest within the research process as well. I don't know, maybe some of them won't be interested in collecting data at all, and will be more interested in writing about the experience by which they walked up the mountain or whatever. So that's relevant. By the way, these are based in sort of recent literature, and I've got a select bibliography at the end if somebody wants to get any references off me. And this responsive with and in place, now this is perhaps the key thing about this pollination project, and other ones that I've heard about from yourself really, including the LETS program here. Now this is responsive thing, this is kind of based in some fairly complex social theory, which I'm probably still trying to get my head around. But the key message to take from it is that citizen science projects are most powerful when combined with other activities and linked to other curricular areas as well. And basically what I mean by it, I think, is the opportunity to respond to the data that you're collecting and to see the place respond as well. So this pollination project was certainly a good idea in this respect, in that they were collecting the data, as I say, finding out in most cases that it was just tarmac and therefore not very good for pollinators. And as a result, going on after that to plan, okay, well, what are we going to do about this, and what are we going to plant, and what kind of flowers do bees like, and so on, and then to see the place respond itself as well. So it's giving agency to the non-human elements that are there. So seeing flowers grow and so on that they've planted, and seeing that there are more pollinators there. I'm yet to. The actual final surveys of the citizen science element are yet to take place. That will be in June this year, but I suspect that will create quite a powerful learning experience if it's the same young people who did the survey in the first place and who have made the changes, and then see that, okay, there are more pollinators there now, if that happens. This importance of cross-curricular learning as well, so it's beyond being a detached objective scientist, and but as we've discussed, really linking it with other areas, because young people probably respond in different ways to places and to activities that they're doing. That was an example, actually. It was in one of the pollination schools that they worked with a local graffiti artist. This was actually in a small town way out in the countryside somewhere where I didn't think they had graffiti artists. But yeah, they ended up making a load of this artwork about pollinators, having done the science element. And another example, they had visits from this beekeeper, for example, who they could ask loads of kind of off-the-cuff questions based on all the stuff they'd already learned about bees, for example. So it's good that I've gone through those 4 things because, I was going to talk about pollination in practice and how it's measured up against those, really. Now, to summarise it would be to say it was a really good idea. However, there have been some there have been challenges for sure, and it's been definitely real. Working with experts and real scientists. I did a load of focus groups with young people who've been involved, and that really seemed to come out as something that had been a really important thing about the project, this chance to work with experts from outside of school, even though the teachers in many cases were quite knowledgeable about what they were learning. These experts coming in from outside, they were really perceived as someone that they could ask any questions to or anything. And as I say, they were making changes to the school grounds and involved in the whole scientific process. There's blogging involved and presenting in assembly for some of them as well. And yeah, sure, it was relevant. It was the importance of pollinators was explained to them beforehand and really how that links to their own lives. It was interesting because it was a wider issue, but they did very well to start in a local place with it, based very much in the young people's school grounds, somewhere they spend time every day. And the response within and in place, as I explained, really, it was not just collecting the data, but also making those key changes to the school grounds and seeing the changes. Now, this was the biggest challenge, probably, and it does kind of relate to the rest of them. The curricular, very often with this, there were 2 interlinked issues, really. Time pressures, we've talked about this a lot, I think, over the last few days. This is a huge thing. These schools were actually, they had to apply to be part of this. So it wasn't that they weren't interested. And they were schools that were very keen on this. They had particular teachers. They were often reliant on one very enthusiastic teacher, but even they would, as the school year went on, priorities would take over, and they would struggle to fit this project in. It was perceived as well as being more suited to small groups as well. And I should say that there was one case I experienced, at least, where it did take place with a whole class. So it can be done. But it very often happened like this, that there was one group of people. This was a group of pupils with a primary school with additional support needs, meaning that they were not engaging particularly well with normal classes, and they had sort of free afternoons to work with this one teacher on the project. So they were the only pupils in that school that were involved in the project, and it was a very powerful thing for them. But if our aim is to embed this thing into mainstream curricula, then it did seem to be falling somewhat short. So there was at least this perception that it was difficult to take a whole group out, a whole class of 30 or 25 pupils or whatever out to work on something like this. And so sometimes it was the kids at the other end of the spectrum who were particularly keen on this, and it was an after-school club, for example. So it was great because it was developing an interest, but again, it was not mainstream curriculum. And yeah, this prioritising of other subject areas seemed to become a big thing as well, which was basically teachers seemed to be so under pressure that they couldn't even take a step back to say, well, okay, how could we cover the key curricular areas such as maths and English with this project? Instead, it was always just seen as an add-on. So there was a bit of a time pressure, really, which really seemed to affect the other ones, the responsiveness for sure, and things like that. And I've been part of this. Is not just a PhD; it's a report I have to write for the funders. And the main feedback I kind of came up with was perhaps more support for teachers. Did I have a whole slide on solutions? Yes, I did. Yeah. So more regular support. I said, well, maybe 260 schools was quite ambitious, actually. Working with fewer schools, but more regularly, perhaps, because it seemed that those 4 sessions that the project officers came in and ran were perhaps not enough to really get this thing embedded into schools, even, as I say, with quite keen and committed teachers. Obviously, the same number of schools more often would be ideal, but that would, we wouldn't have quite the resources for that. So more regular support and clear and concise cross-curricular resources for teachers. Something clear, a one-page kind of document saying where you can find more information on this that would tell them this is how you run a maths lesson, for example, with this, using this project. These resources did exist, actually. I did feed this back to somebody who was kind of high up in the project. We did do this, but it's making it very clear where these things are, signposting teachers to them, and at least initially having a very small sort of leaflet that will tell you the places to go. It was also relevant that it's actually covered 4 different curricula. Each nation of the UK has a different curriculum, so it was kind of designed as a one-size-fits-all for all of them. There are subtle differences between them, and that was significant, I think. And that thing as well, making sure that citizen science is alongside other activities so that young people understand the relevance of it, and so on. So that was really a summary of the evaluation themes of this project, that it was, that it was a great idea, and that it was part of a bigger project involving this active response making, as I call it, so actually doing stuff to help the pollinators. But there were those drawbacks, I just said, like it could be more regular and it could have had much more cross-curricular linking. Because, just to recap this, to effectively embed citizen science into education, it's making it regular, real, relevant and responsive with and in place. So that's information about the project there. There's all sorts of resources on there, including that survey. So that can be carried out really in any school grounds anywhere. And I think probably the cross-curricular resources as well. It's been criticised a little bit, that website, for being a bit all over the place. But there it is, and there are plenty of resources on it. And any questions about the literature that we've used to come up with that stuff, or about this project more generally, that is my email address and that of my Dr. Greg May in there. So that is it.
How did you contact the school in the first place?
How did I contact? So, do you mean how were the schools recruited to be part of the project, or how did I as researcher? Right, well, I don't know exactly, because I was not. This was my involvement was only as a PhD, so the project was already set up and kind of ready to go by the time I was recruited. I think various teachers told me how they found out about it, and it was often a kind of at events, outdoor learning events or something, where this charity, Learning Through Landscapes, they would have a stall there and they would tell people about this pollination project. And they're also a charity that run training events to do with where they run training courses for teachers about basically making it easier to get outdoors and do ththings outdoors with their pupils. So I think it was promoted through kind of networks like that. And as I say, the schools were there were more schools than that who applied to be part of it. So it was kind of the keen ones, and they were chosen usually because there was a really keen teacher there. So having those schools in place already was incredible for gaining access as a researcher, really, because normally I would have been just contacting people out of the blue and trying to find schools that were keen and having to explain the whole thing. But it was really easy. It was, you're part of the pollination project, I'm part of it too. Can I come in and meet your pupils and ask them a few questions? And it was invariably, there were a few teachers who I think just didn't reply, but invariably they were like, yeah, sure, yeah, whatever. And then I had to go through the usual process of getting consent from all the pupils and things like that. But in terms of gaining access, this was a huge opportunity, and really, and I did spend time probably about 30 schools in total that I visited in total. So, yeah, sure.
Did you find between the environmental ed or the outdoor ed aspect and the citizen science aspect, so the gardening or the observations of pollinators, was one was more receptive from the teachers, or one was easier to implement?
I think, perhaps the citizen science element, I think, probably didn't happen as often as it should have done. I think it maybe also should have been more regular. So I think perhaps, that was something that was maybe more difficult to. I think teachers really had a lot of the time had a real interest in gardening or in conservation and things like that. So I think perhaps that element was easier, had a greater uptake perhaps. So perhaps that's an interesting thing, just sort of fitting in citizen science off the back of that kind of thing. The citizen science element, from what I saw, it did need probably more support from those project officers to come in and run the thing, even though the survey had been quite carefully designed to have to be quite user friendly, I would say. All three of you right there.
Maybe you said, but are the schools going on with the projects? Is it sustainable?
Hopefully, but
do you have any feedback?
So there were actually 2 phases to this project. Of those 260 schools, 130 of them kind of got most of the support from the members of staff from the charity during 2016 to 17. And the other 130 got it this academic year. Now, I did most of that qualitative research in the first of those. And I haven't done this yet, actually, but in kind of May or June, so towards the end of this school year, I'm going to be contacting the teachers that I interviewed or that I got to know during that first year again, and seeing whether it's carried on in the schools. And I'm also going to be speaking to a few in the second phase, because there have been challenges with that as well. For example, saying, okay, you're part of this project, but we're not working with you on it until September 2017, or whatever that being, like a year after they'd kind of been accepted onto it. I have heard from a few of the staff that there has been a bit of a drop off of some of those schools, like teachers who have moved on or whatever, and whenever they've contacted them, they've been like, oh, but sorry, what project? You know, it's kind of, so it has been a challenge in some schools as well. So and it relates, I suppose, to that regular contact that's needed. But in some of the schools that I have visited regularly, some of the ones that where there was a really keen and committed teacher, I'd be optimistic about that I think it will carry on in those ones. And that's the idea, that they keep doing this survey every year, and that they keep making more improvements to the school grounds and so on. I would say, I'm optimistic that it will carry on in a few schools, but there will be a minority, I'm afraid, but it might still be a significant number of them. Yeah.
And do you also already collaborate together with iSpot? Because the bees coming on to the schoolyards and students are...
Do you know they haven't? That hasn't happened actually, and that would be good.
Because then you can measure results as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, against other places and so on. Yeah, no, there was I should have said they did produce the pollination project. They did produce some very nice, handy kind of ID guides to different kind of pollinators and stuff like that. But yeah, you're right, it didn't really go beyond that project. Yeah.
I could give it a historical context, if that's just very quickly.
Sure.
This survey was run by OPO as part of the overall Explore Nature initiative, which we were originally a part of. This survey came on after our time with the project ended. iSpot has been promoted in all the surveys, so you did see iSpot's logo on the survey.
Oh, it wasn't?
Yes, Imperial College that runs OPO, you know.
So
the promotion with iSpot, because the relationship we had ended, the funding ended in 2012, we no longer co-promote. But it is on there, but I'm not quite sure how much promotion is being done to use iSpot. But in the previous projects, there was like a biodiversity one, which we led on the Open University. There were different ones by the different partners. And there was this cross-promotion of initiatives to make it work and push it into the schools. So there were a lot of officers that worked in the schools. I had mentors at the OU that worked on the ground and in the schools as well. So I'm not quite sure exactly what's happening, but it is there as a resource. It's printed on the actual survey.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't see it being used though, so yeah,
So
perhaps a bit more communication.
It needs more, and Opal's coming to an end fairly soon as well.
Yeah, I've heard that.
The
Yeah,
funding
it's been going
issues.
for 10 years.
Another
or something,
story,
right? But
yeah.
that's a shame, yeah. There are, a couple over there, Rick and, yeah.
Well, it's quite a big issue, really. Colleagues in the UK will appreciate that because of exam and inspection pressure, there's huge amount of emphasis on literacy, numeracy, testing of students and pupils around that. And you referred to that, Andy, as like it's for time and curriculum pressure. And I just wondered to what extent citizen science projects were having to take account of that aspect of improving literacy, numeracy, communication skills and so on, and building those into the design of projects. I mean, we've got a little bit of anecdotal evidence that participation in Lab 13 does improve the standardised tests scores, but it's very anecdotal, it's a very small sample. But I just wondered if you had any kind of further thoughts about that, slewing, that kind of skewing of activity because of that emphasis on other basic skills in schools.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. There was definitely a few teachers I came across who were sort of later in the year that the project was running, being like, I've just not had time because of literacy and numeracy and all of this. And I think citizen science, as I've said with the cross-curricular stuff, I think citizen science projects would do very well to kind of link in better with that. It was up to the individual teachers as well, because it reminds me there was actually a secondary school in the Glasgow area where the teacher there was, he worked with a group of additional support needs pupils, so that's ones who were probably not going to end up taking the final exams at school, but were, he had a literacy group, he called them. He was using the project specifically as a tool for literacy, because there was a blog which was underused, I think, but schools had a password and things in their own blog space where they could write about it. And he was a character, that teacher, actually. He told me once he didn't actually care about pollinators. I sort of semi-joking. He was like, I don't really care about pollinators. But there was a really useful example to me of how this thing had many different aims across the curricular spectrum in different contexts, really, rather than just being about the science. He'd just seen it as this great tool to get them out there, actually. So not just the science, but the actual digging up the school grounds and planting things and stuff, to get these young people kind of more prepared, perhaps, for more physical and outdoor jobs, and also to give them something to write about, he said was a key thing. So there were cases where it was kind of given a more literacy or numeracy focused thing, but that was not, I think that was from the individual teachers rather than in the design of it. I mean, it's quite compartmentalised, I suppose. You've got Opal, who designed that survey, who were very much about engaging people with science, and they perhaps didn't think about the other things they could cover with it. But yeah.
I can take one last question.
One final, sure. Hannah.
You very slightly touched on it. I just wondered if the schools interacted at all, so whether they shared results and whether there's a mass data set that they could use. Or...
Do you know, this was a big thing about it, and I should have said that. Schools were arranged into clusters, which was 4 schools in a local area, and they the idea was that the training sessions were run for teachers, for example, and the project officers would go there to just one of those schools, and teachers from the other ones would come in. And occasionally there were things run with primary and secondary schools where there was one of the sort of standard sessions that the project officers would run was design your school grounds sessions. So they'd show them the kind of habitats that they might want for pollinators in there, and they would then they would design on a massive sheet of paper like how they wanted their school grounds to look, and that happened in a few cases with primary and secondary schools. The idea being kind of transition was upper primary school pupils who would soon be going to that secondary school. So there was that, and on the whole, it again related to the time pressure thing. It didn't work as well as it should have done. I don't think the teachers would just concentrate on their own. Okay, well, what have I got to do for this, and just concentrate on their own school. You asked about sharing resources as well, or sharing results. So there is a whole. It was they do submit it to a database which was maintained by Opal, the results that they gather. In terms of like actually getting access to the raw data of that and seeing the data that different schools gathered, I'm not sure actually, but there's certainly at various stages reports of that data were shared with teachers, certainly. So I'm not sure if they could compare it with individual schools, but they certainly, I guess they could have done in terms of just contacting teachers within that cluster and shared results that way. Whether it actually happened or not, I'm not sure. That answers that.
Sure.
We're done?
Thank you. And
Okay, no worries.